Any questions you have for the presenters, just put them in the chat, and then Laura's going to sift through them and she'll gather them and just make sure it's more organized and stuff and ask the presenters at the end. My name's Janae Evans. I am the district manager for the Carroll County Conservation District. Laura is here for the Grafton, and I'll let her introduce herself real quick.
Sure. So I'm Laura Sokolowski. I'm the office manager for the Grafton County Conservation District. We do a lot of different things, but if you're in Grafton County and you're interested in conservation or learning more about resources and services, definitely feel free to reach out. I love connecting.
Perfect. We have two speakers today. We have Mike Gagnon from the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. He's a forestry field specialist. And then we have Bill Copeland from the Campton Conservation Commission. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike so he can start his presentation.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Janaea and Laura. We're going to do a quick sort of crash course on knotweed ecology and management. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay and see my slides. We're probably all pretty familiar with knotweed, but we'll go over some of the details here as well. I work down in Hillsborough County, so I'm happy to be kind of able to connect with folks in the northern counties through this webinar series. A little bit of background and habit about knotweed. It's an invasive, right? So that makes it a non-native plant from Asia, and it's in the buckwheat family. It's herbaceous and a perennial, so the above ground parts die back when we get like that first cold frost every year. You can see kind of a classic roadside example there. It can be 10, even 15 feet in height, and as wide as it has sort of sunlight and areas to take advantage of, but sort of individual clumps of plants can be, about 10 feet wide. It prefers full sun, so I always try to, when I'm learning a plant and how to control it, know some of its limitations. So it can tolerate the shade, but it doesn't really thrive. So we see it in sunny open areas, disturbed sites that have full sun. So woodland sites, where there's been a landing or an opening, open spaces, ditches, roadsides, and especially a problem in our riparian river corridors as well, where there's lots of sun. And it really prefers sort of moist, well-drained soils as well. We all know it's aggressive. It spreads very quickly. It's got some really good adaptations for spreading. So it spreads quickly along surface waters and along rights of way. Mostly that's from fragmentation of plant parts, and it can really colonize any exposed open areas if it's allowed to spread, and quickly can outgrow and shade out other native plants and create monocultures like we see in this photo here. It does have some allelopathic properties. That means it's got chemicals that can alter soil chemistry and inhibit other plants from germinating in and around its root system. And one of the issues in our river systems is it's really a poor erosion control. Part of that is that it's a perennial, and all of this green you see on the river, once winter comes, it dies back and it leaves that riverbank exposed to sort of bare soil with only the root system of knotweed, which tends to spread horizontally. So it can fragment and break apart, and that's one of the ways it really spreads and moves well. It's really good at reproducing from clones of different plant parts, which we'll point out in a minute. So some of the problems we see, a big one is visibility and safety in right-of-ways, right? Even in some places, seeing it sort of push people off sidewalks when it's aggressively growing along roadsides. It can damage and impact structures. It can impact recreational areas, and it can cause environmental issues like water and shoreline stability, habitat quality from a diversity standpoint, and it can impact sort of some sensitive species like our wood turtle that need these river riparian corridors to sort of migrate and do their thing. Right, it can be hard to pass through some of these intensive areas of knotweed, and maybe they lack some of the normal forage and species that some of these creatures might be looking for, like the wood turtle. It's got a zigzag-like pattern in the leaves. The leaves are fairly large, 3 to 7 inches long, ovate in shape, but sort of flat and truncated at the base. It produces these, I don't know if I mentioned it in these slides, but you can see some of these. They're called calyxes of three-sided seeds. It produces a lot of seeds, but that's really not one of the main ways that this plant spreads. When we look close at it, sometimes it's called bamboo, right? Because it has these hollow segmented stems. Those little segments give it the structure it needs to be able to stand up, but also have that hollow structure. When it's alive and growing during the year, the stems are green with purple blotches. And then that perennial part, the above ground part that dies, will turn brown and be dry and brittle. So over here on the left, you can see a little bit of maybe a root growing here. All along these segments are dormant adventitious buds that are capable of producing an entire new colony of knotweed. So we definitely don't want to be mowing it or chopping it up or laying these pieces down somewhere we don't want knotweed. That's just one of the ways that it's capable of spreading really well, is that it has these, it can make these segments become new colonies through sort of clonal reproduction. So here are the flowers. Flowers from August to September, small, whitish, abundant panicles, and they turn, they become these three-winged, heart-shaped calyx seeds, right? When we get to the below ground part, it's got some other advantages. One that helps us recognize it is this very orange rhizome color, but these underground stems are full of dormant buds and capable of producing new knotweed colonies. So on the left, we see this underground rhizome. Over here, we see a crown where we would have a clump of plants coming out of the ground. This would be filled with dormant buds ready to sprout new pieces of knotweed. We can see some of those little buds getting started here. And again, I already showed you that one. So this asexual reproduction is the main way that knotweed is able to colonize and spread. And a lot of times that's caused by human error in sort of mowing or moving soil that has parts of it that can go dormant and then activate when moisture and sunlight and conditions are right. So it reproduces mainly by vegetative means, root and stem fragments. They can create whole new colonies, even a little 1/4-inch piece. Cut and broken stems and roots will sprout if left on moist soil, and the fragments are spread by floods, high water, and equipment, or in contaminated fill material that gets moved around. Some examples of knotweed getting started in the year, some new growth coming up from one of those root crowns. Kind of a common site you might see where material's been brought in, and then some hay has been brought down to maybe grow a new grass or something where material's been moved. And then this is what it looks like if you're trying to dig it up. There's a lot of underground parts that need to be sort of taken care of or removed if you were managing it. Mechanical can be very difficult because of the depth and the extensiveness of the rhizomes underground. Here we go, full summer or late summer in full flowering. It's for all of the sort of issues we have with knotweed, it's an incredible pollinator, and there aren't many things flowering at that time of year, so it can really congregate a lot of different pollinators in that sort of late August, September timeframe. And then this is what we see in the winter. And a little bit of good news is if all this stuff that's dry and brown and dried up is non-viable. So if you cut it and then allow it to dry up, then you can dispose of it pretty easily. You don't have to worry about it spreading. All of this above ground biomass is not going to spread or cause new infestations of knotweed once it's dry. So let's quickly get into some options for, as difficult as a plant this is. The best management practices are pretty straightforward and simple. And there's a really good resource that if you don't have it, you should get a copy. And I shared it with our hosts to share with everyone after. It's the Japanese Knotweed Best Management Practices Manual written by Doug Sagan. And so mechanical, we'll just start with that. Mechanical is cutting any kind of, machinery, brush saws, hand saws, loppers, shovels, but not mowing, right? Anything that takes a plant like this and makes it into small little pieces is to be avoided because those fragments can create more knotweed. But cutting it like with loppers, right, and then piling it up somewhere on tarps or pallets to dry is one technique for just sort of managing it from a right of way standpoint. If it's just not to eradicate, but just to make an area safe or accessible, right? Digging and pulling aren't really good options unless it's very small infestation. I think the BMP manual recommends digging and burying knotweed up to 7 feet below grade to try and get rid of it in an area. So it's a pretty tall task, right? So cutting is a good technique when it's used in combination with an herbicide application or preparation for smothering, or just as a temporary removal of vegetation that's sort of in the way from some sort of access. It's not really going to control anything. So that material that you cut does need to be disposed of somehow. So proper disposal is important. We don't want to be spreading it to places where it isn't. So we want to dry it, make it non-viable, and then dispose of it. Moving on to herbicides, we always try to use an IPM and use as little or no herbicides as possible. But with knotweed and its just ability to create extensive underground systems, it can be really difficult to control. I also shared a video of Matt Tarr. He's one of our extension colleagues who spent he spent several years battling it without herbicides on his property. So you'll be able to watch that video and see the kind of effort he put into that. But a 2% glyphosate solution with a surfactant is a really good technique that provides really good control of knotweed. Timing is really important. This plant's a perennial, as I said, and so it's going to translocate all of its excess sugars and materials back into its roots after flowering. So if you can capture that timing and treat it then with a foliar application, it'll translocate all of that foliar applied herbicide into the roots, and that's how you really get control. So we want to be watching our plants. The flowering is something that can be different from site to site across the state, and we want to try to best time it after flowering to put that application on to get it to really move that material for us. So a real ideal management is to cut stems in, say, June. That can short circuit flowering for that year. It can reduce that biomass by an incredible amount, making it safer and easier to treat. It means we'll be using also less herbicide to get our foliar coverage. So it's a good piece of an IPM. So you can imagine some of those photos I shown where it's 10, 15 feet high. If you cut that in June, deal with those stems and materials, dry them up, and come back in the fall, you might be looking at something like this, where it's only waist high, right? And wasn't able to complete its own physiological life cycle and go to flowering. So timing can be a little bit easier late in the year. This is not a thing where it's one and done. It says here to follow up for 3 to 5 years, and I would probably say that's even on the shorter side. It could be 7, 8. It could be many years where that first treatment might remove 90% of it, and then each year you go back, you might only be finding 10% of what was originally there. But if you stop or turn your back, you could quickly end up back where you started. So you really have to monitor that site and stay on top of it for as long as it might take to eradicate it. And I'm not really sure what that number is, but it's 3 to 5, maybe 7 years. Another technique that can be really useful, I think, in smaller sites where you want a permanent control is smothering. There's some really good instructions in that manual for proper smothering. It involves cutting and then disposing and then putting down a layer of something soft like wood chips because you don't want those cut, dried stems to be puncturing your plastic. Use a heavy plastic and cover the area you want to smother. You have to overlap those plastics and then extend them well beyond, up to 4 feet beyond the last bit of knotweed you find. And then over top of that, you would put more mulch or chips or material, right? And then that's kind of like a permanent control of the area. I suppose maybe after 10 years, you could try to remove it if you needed to, but I think maybe it's best to think of it as a permanent control. I've seen it be really successful where there are knotweed and trailhead kiosks, and they just want to reclaim like maybe a 40-foot square area or something like that. And in that video I mentioned that Matt Tarr created, he's done this for his entire yard, and he's now growing crops and things on top of it. So the plastic and the mulch is permanent, and he's working on top of it. So this is one technique, but obviously you're putting plastic in the ground, and there's a lot of labor and intensity to it, and it might not be a practical solution for a very large area or a river system or something like that. So just a little bit on, pesticide licensing. Anyone can do this on their own property as long as we're following setbacks and the rules. I believe I usually mention this in most of my talks. Conservation commissions, it's really tricky. You'd have to become a commercial applicator, not for hire, or have someone in the town who has a supervisory license who can supervise the activity and be responsible. So someone needs to be licensed to work on town land and be the responsible party for the fate of those chemicals and following all the rules and regulations. So New Hampshire law requires that anyone who applies pesticides on property that's not theirs be licensed as a commercial applicator. Or there's the not for hire piece if you're, say, like a golf course employee and you just work for that company's land or that town's land. It's more complicated than this, and us at Extension, the Pesticide Safety Education Program, or folks at the Division of Pesticide Control, we're happy to sort of give people more information and assist them through what information they might need to move forward with this. And so this last picture here is my hand with some giant knotweed. There are actually 3 species. And if you see the slides I sent around with the field guide, most of what we see is Japanese knotweed, but there's also one called giant knotweed. It doesn't quite have the purple blotches. The stems are much more vertical. It looks more like a field of corn, and the leaves can be very, very large, like double, triple the size of our Japanese knotweed. So, and then there's a hybrid one called a Bohemian knotweed that I haven't really seen around, but it's kind of a cross between the two. So the Japanese knotweed tends to kind of go up about 8 or 10 feet and become an umbrella. This one is much more vertical, and just like the name giant knotweed, it's much taller and has bigger leaves, but they're all Renutrias. They're all in the buckwheat family. They're all knotweed. They all behave the same. So I don't know if I've used up all my time. There's one other technique I didn't mention. It's called a girdling technique, and it's using like I think it's a 1/2-inch metal mesh, and to me, it's not really not an eradication tool, but a way to manage knotweed in some areas where you might want it to be less of a barrier. So the knotweed grows up through the metal mesh, and then as the knotweed stem expands, it girdles itself and then doesn't quite develop into as big of a robust plant as well. But there are drawbacks. It's expensive. You're putting metal in the ground, which can cause other hazards. And it's going to build up biomass on top of that mesh and eventually root over top of it. So I'm not too excited about that tool as well as being sort of a long-term management option that doesn't have other drawbacks and might cost too much. So I'll end there, and
Wonderful. Thank you so
thanks.
much, Mike.
You're welcome.
Next, we're going to hear from Bill. So, Bill, feel free to share your slides. Uh, Bill is part of the Campton Conservation Commission and will be sharing a little bit about their work with Knotweed. We're very excited to have this case study. Thank you for everyone who's been putting questions in the chat, and I'll turn this over to Bill.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for all that information. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact and talk about how we approach the knotweed problem in Campton and give you some practical tips. You've probably looked around your town and said, oh my gosh, this is like an overwhelming problem. And so what we did is we took a very strategic approach to this, and we chip away at it every single year. And we focused on knotweed, and hopefully you'll get some tips and tricks out of this case study that I put together. So in Campton, we noticed there was a big problem. We would just be driving around and, in the Conservation Commission, we would mention to everybody, did you see that big patch over there? So it led to forming an invasive species subcommittee within our commission. And that originally started with 3 people on that. We began by researching New Hampshire invasives, the prevalence of those across the state, where are they? And we decided to focus on Japanese knotweed. We did find other invasives within Campton, but pretty much we were knocking down the bittersweet in our parking lots, to our properties, things like that. But Japanese knotweed really was everywhere, so we decided to focus on that. One of the first things we did was reach out to the state expert, Doug Sagan, and asked him some questions and some additional information. He actually came up and met with our commission and did a nice presentation, gave us some materials, one of which was that Japanese knotweed booklet that Mike mentioned. We started looking around different potential test sites around town, and then we invited Doug back up to do a kind of a site visit with us on various properties to kind of discuss the approach that we would take with these parcels. And then we started what we call windshield surveys. We wanted to sort of get an idea of the extent of knotweed within Campton, where it was, whether it was just small little outcroppings, whether it was just crazy infestations. So we started doing that around the town. Doug introduced us to a tool that you can download for your phone called EDD Maps. And what this is a nationwide database, and you can record instances of a whole host of invasives, not just Japanese knotweed. And then you can start tracking that within your area. And then later on, you can look and drill down to individual streets, individual properties, look at a whole road, and you can sort of see the extent of the problem. So this is really kind of recording this to get a better idea of the kind of the breadth of the infestation. So EDD Maps is kind of a nice tool. You just take out your phone, it'll automatically capture the GPS coordinates if you stand in front of the infestation. You take a picture of it. You can enter notes, and we typically put in whether it was on public land, private land, whether it was a small, a medium, or large infestation. This thing gets uploaded. You don't have to do it after each thing. You can just keep snapping away at different pictures and then after the fact upload them to the database. And it was kind of interesting that we found that the person that was reviewing our reportings was actually Doug. So he would review our uploads and say, yes, that's Japanese knotweed, and then he would approve it and it would get posted into the database. And then we can use that database to review at any time and show people, the extent of the problem. If we're talking to the select board, we can easily show them the mapping for a particular area and the infestation of that. This is what within the database reporting might look like. There's the picture down at the bottom. It puts it on a nice little map based on your GPS coordinates, and it tells what the invasive was, Japanese knotweed in this case, what county it is even. Then here I'm drilling down to a particular area. In Campton, one of our biggest problem areas is on Ellsworth Road. The knotweed was originally planted at an old inn in the Overlook type of area. And what's happened is that through, it's a steep hill, so it kind of runs downhill. So the broken pieces of that knotweed and the rhizomes underneath the ground, they all created more infestations down the hill. So you can see easily, all of that. So obviously this is a huge problem area for us. So just a couple rules of thumb. I know you look around town, it can be overwhelming. Know that you can't get rid of knotweed forever, unfortunately. You're merely mitigating its growth, and there are different ways I'll go over it, and Mike covered those areas, but I'll talk a little bit about those approaches and what we chose. Even the best method, spraying, can only last perhaps 7 years at best. The advice that I would say is you start slow. Don't tackle your largest project right off the bat. So select a few test sites to begin with. Try different methods if you want, and see what works for you. Each infestation is really a unique situation. You have to look at a number of different factors to determine what method might work best on that particular parcel. So in terms of the smothering method, you cut the knotweed down to the ground level. You cover it with several inches of wood chips. You place contractor grade vinyl sheets over that area. This is thick vinyl. This isn't your typical trash bag thickness. You cover with another 2 inches of the wood chips, and then you simply monitor that over time to see if the plant pops up outside of the area that you've covered. Now, one of the things that we had an issue with is you need a lot of wood chips if you're talking about a good amount of space that you've covered. So that's a consideration with this particular method. Mesh screen method, we've kind of fully adopted well. In this scenario, you cut the knotweed down to the ground level, you cover the area with a 1/2-inch wire mesh. You used hook stakes with zip ties. So what we would do is actually tie the zip tie through the little squares in the mesh, and then we would use a hook stake to actually secure that into the ground. And then what we would do is if you have some broken wooden stakes around, or even you could even use branches per se, stake those at the corners to provide additional stability so that the mesh wouldn't shift, if a plow came by or something like that. Now, one thing that we discovered is that the wire mesh comes in big rolls, typically 100 feet, but could be less. But it's narrow, typically 4 feet. So if you're doing a 20 by 20 area, so you need multiple side-by-side sections of this mesh. So what you need to do then is you lay the roll, and then you put another one next to it, but you do need to actually use those zip ties to connect those different rolls next to it. You don't need a lot of tools. We found that the wire mesh is pretty thin, so just some wire cutters just to make your life easier, a mallet, maybe a tape measure just to make sure everything is lining up and you get the right amount of wire mesh that you need for that particular area. So this is an example of one of our early test sites. So it was pretty ambitious for us. We had many panels we had to line up side by side. And one of the things I'll point out with this method is that you'll notice that the growth still comes through. So the main drive behind the mesh method is that you're cutting off or choking off the growth of that plant. So even with the mesh and it's still growing, it will never grow to some huge bush once you have the mesh down. It kind of chokes off the plant and takes the energy away from it. You can go ahead and cut that. It will continue to grow, however, but this is one way to sort of control so you don't have those huge bushes that pop up alongside the road or alongside of a driveway. Herbicide spraying. I know from a conservation standpoint, a lot of people don't like to consider herbicides, but really, in a lot of situations, this is really the best method as opposed to the other two. It's really ideal for larger areas, like a half an acre or more. I did want to point out the New Hampshire DOT does this spraying in medians routinely along 93. In our case, in working with our applicator, the cut in late June, and you leave that knotweed to die. You can collect it if you wanted to, put it on a tarp for drying. You could perhaps burn it later or bag it up later, or you can just leave it there. In our case, spraying took place in late August, early September. Our applicators suggested that we do this before the plant starts flowering. And that way you avoid any issues with bees and insects that perhaps like the flowers. So you stop it and you spray it well before that particular point. Now, retreatment is needed. We're revisiting 2 sites in this fiscal year. There is new growth. Sometimes you miss things, and a lot depends if you've got a stream that keeps feeding knotweed pieces and things like that to a place you've treated. Then of course you're going to get some more growth there, and we have that situation going on. But we're hoping that this will substantially mitigate for up to 7 years. As Mike said, the first time around might get rid of 90% of it. So we're hopeful that we won't need too many retreatments after that. So after our windshield surveys, what our process was that we decided to start with the knotweed. We searched the town for about 3 test sites, and we wanted to start that in the summer. We determined the best approach for each site. As I said, we ran into issues with trying to find enough wood chips and things like that. So we decided to start with the mesh method and really become experts in that particular approach. We selected one homeowner site along a very heavily infested town road called Lower Beach Road in Campton. And we put approximately 20 by 40 feet of mesh on that particular area. Ambitious, it took a while. So we also applied it to several smaller little clusters that we saw along Route 3, just to sort of see how that might work in those situations. And then in year 2, we followed up on our larger mesh project. And as you saw, we noticed the plant still grows perhaps to knee high with that mesh. We looked at our smaller little patches and they certainly did better. And it sort of really took the steam out of those sections. So we kind of determined that the wire mesh method was both too costly and time consuming for any large scale projects. So we had two big projects that we had in mind. One was along a town road, Beach Hill Road and Lower Beach Hill in a part of Campton, and those were dirt roads. So that had implications because what was happening is that when the town was doing ditching or snow plowing, it was sort of moving pieces of the knotweed that was growing there along the road. So you could actually see the creek along the road going on there. And then one of our town conservation properties is called Blair Woodlands, and this shared a driveway on one end of the property with a private condo association called the Red Sleigh. And the danger there was that a stream ran through that, separating the two properties. The knotweed was growing wild along their driveway and along the edge of our property across from the stream. And it was all heading down towards the Penny. So that became a priority area project for us. So in terms of selecting a commercial applicator, we downloaded a New Hampshire certified commercial applicator list from the state's website. We looked at that list and we chose providers who were close to our area. We didn't want somebody driving, 2 hours to do it because chances are they wouldn't. I reached out to about 5 different vendors and told them the situation and asked them to survey the parcels and give us a price proposal. One thing I learned is that it's a very narrow window for cutting and for spraying, so that a lot of people were booked up and they get booked up very quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. We reviewed the quotes. We selected a vendor in late winter, early spring, and then things got underway. A few different considerations when you're looking at vendors. So we found that price can really vary across the different vendors for whatever reason. So that's why it's always important to get a number of different vendor quotes. Years of experience with knotweed mitigation is really important. I found through working with and talking with a lot of vendors on that list that one guy was really known as Mr. Knotweed. So that was important to know that he had a lot of experience and did some work with a number of towns with knotweed. Another factor which was really interesting is how the applicator approaches the project. We had one guy that was going to drive down the town road and he had mounted on his truck the sprayer. So you can imagine how that would really be spraying along the town road and just kind of en masse. Another applicator we found did a very focused approach. He went in there, he would have a backpack, he did a very focused spraying and kind of limiting any kind of environmental damage. Our vendor provided us with really detailed maps and a lot numbers. And this was important for a particular reason, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. This vendor also showed environmental concerns. He was very cognizant of spraying, when the wind was not around, it was not going to rain for a number of days, there wasn't a lot of water around. So that's really important when you evaluate these different vendors. The vendor should also obtain the necessary state permits. That's just another layer that you don't need to get involved in. And you want a vendor that's going to do that for you. Something that we had not considered initially with the project is that the vendor asked us to send letters to the homeowners along these properties, just to let them know what was going on and timing and things like that. And then in some cases, you would need to get special permission for that vendor to access a person's property. So that was something that we found along the way. So we selected a vendor called New England Forestry Consultants. We signed our work orders in March. In June, he started cutting the knotweed on our 2 projects. He came back in August and started spraying with his backpack, and then we received his billing and did all the payment stuff in fall. This is a question. This is a picture of what this looked like before he did his cutting. In this particular instance, it was pretty major along one of our town roads there. And he cut it down to about this level. If you're doing the smother method, I would suggest you do it down to the ground level. If you're doing the wire mesh method, also what we did is we cut down to really the ground level. So then we put the wire mesh on that. With the spraying, it doesn't so much matter. You don't have to get it down to the ground level. He'll be spraying in that particular area, so that's fine to have it stick up a little like that. It's still going to start killing the plant. This was one of our projects I mentioned. We had a stream running down on the left side of that picture, and that's the driveway to the condo association. And we actually did a cost share with this property owner and our conservation property. And so we just cut it, just left it where it was, and then he came back and he would do the spraying. So letters and permission forms, as I mentioned, this was kind of a new wrinkle in the projects, where the vendor giving map and lot numbers came into play is that we could then look at the town tax database and get the owner's names and their addresses. And so then we could mail them our particular letters. We actually developed two versions of a letter. So homes in what's termed in the normal right of way, and that can vary by town, but generally it's 25 to 30 feet from the center line of the road on each side of the road. We provided them with a very basic letter to say, hey, this is what we're doing this year. We're doing this in end of June. There'll be a long cutting, and then later in the summer they'll be back for spraying. And if you have any questions, here's my contact info for questions. And then there were some homes that you were out of the right of way, but you could actually see like a bush on their front lawn or something like that. So they got a different letter. They got the normal right of way letter, but they also got another letter that said, hey, you could opt, since this is on your property per se, you can opt out for that piece of the thing, but we're still going to do spraying on the right of way. And then some other locations where the applicator was going to be on their land for quite a bit of time, like along that condo association driveway, they needed a specific permission to access form that I sent to those homeowners. So near two, we developed another, near three, I should say. We we developed as a commission and a subcommittee about half a dozen parcels that we were interested in approaching this year. I called the applicator and had him come and survey those parcels and price out for that. And then we met as a committee to determine what were our priorities for this year, kind of looking at budgets and what really needed to be done. We determined we needed to reapply on the town roads in the Red Sleigh project that we had done in the previous year. And then we added 3 new sites, including Ellsworth Hill, which is a major project.
Hello, Bill. This is just your couple-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to seek out grant sources and apply to those various sources for that to help defray the cost. We also get a yearly budget from our town to address these particular issues. It's not a one and done, as Mike said. I just wanted to know, we have a hotspot team that just drives around town. If they see an infestation, a small one, they just pop out there, throw the mesh on, cut it, throw the mesh on, and kind of take care of it that way. And then just in terms of resources, if you want to go to the Campton Conservation website, look under resources, invasive species. There are a number of articles that we've done, a video that's good. You have the state guide that Mike provided, some other materials. And then, of course, UNH is always a valuable resource, and New Hampshire's Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food with Doug Saigan. That's it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who's been sharing your questions. A special thank you to both of our presenters. We're about to launch into our Q&A. Many of these questions could refer to either of you, so if you have a preference, feel free to launch right in. Some of them are for one of you or the other, and I will mention that if that's the case. The first is, could the monoculture habit of knotweed eventually become its downfall? Are there disease or insect pressures that could help control it over time?
I'll let
I'll
Mike
take
handle
that one. That's always the best solution, right? Is that there's some sort of biological control. But the problem with most of these invasives is they've escaped those natural controls. So I don't know of any fungal or insects or other kind of pests that might be a pest of knotweed that would control it. I can see how monocultures, right, can be these situations where a single disease, right, can take care of something. We can only hope, I guess, right? But I don't know of anything in the toolbox for IPM that's a biological control for knotweed at this time.
I know they're, constantly experimenting with different things. Some people have said, oh, inject this, soap and vinegar, down the stems and things like that. And Doug had mentioned that he knew of some experiments like, electricity into the ground to try and get the roots, but nothing other than the three methods that we've mentioned.
Yeah, there is a system. It's called root wave technology. It's not hasn't really taken hold in the States. It's European in its origins, but there's definitely some interest gathering about using this root wave technology to attach it to the plant and basically cook the roots of this plant as a different tool for control. So hopefully we'll see more of that if it's successful in the future.
Thank you. Another one, is it okay to cut with a clearing saw or sickle bar mower? If so, what is the best time to cut?
Yeah, so as long as you're not mowing it, because mowing it creates little fragments, and then it gets on a mowing deck, and then that mower moves to a new location and little parts fly out. I think any kind of tool you're using, I think the photo had somebody with a machete, right? A brush saw, loppers, sickle bar, those are all good things because you're sort of making a cut, right? And then you're either laying that knotweed right where it is and it's already there, so it's not such a big deal that if it catches root there, if you're going to come back and spray, or you're putting it somewhere to dry and then dispose of when it's dry.
And I'll add that you probably want to, or at least I do, is disinfect my tools, my cutting tools, just on the off chance that there's some, pieces of the knotweed on your tools, and you don't want to spread that to your own home garden or something.
Whatever tool is going to be the most efficient physically for the person cutting, right? That's not creating little pieces is the tool to use.
Don't want any fragments.
Yeah.
How do you handle knotweed along riverbanks?
So licensed applicators apply for special permits, and in those special permits, they have to document that they are doing things to minimize risk. There's risk associated with pesticides, and the label is designed to minimize risk, the directions, risk to the applicator, risk to the environment. So long as you follow them, you have to legally follow the labels. And then you have to submit that special permit, which Bill had mentioned. That's why you hire the professional applicator, because right-of-ways and wetlands need special permits. And so there are aquatically approved herbicides and sometimes surfactants, which are the the material that is like a soap that helps the herbicide get into the leaves or disperse evenly across the surface. Sometimes those can be more sort of hazardous, maybe than the herbicide. So those have to be carefully approved as aquatic use. Some are approved for in water use, right? Because we have other issues like milfoil, but just using aquatic approved herbicides near water, I think, is something that's going to get that special permit approved, that you're doing your due diligence to be as safe as possible.
Here's one for Bill. What's the best way to advocate for towns and cities to take action on knotweed infestations and other invasive plants too?
I'm sorry, say that again.
No worries. What is the best way to advocate for towns and cities to take action on knotweed infestations and other invasive plants too?
Well, like I said, we picked a few test sites and we looked at the different methods for approaching those. So you want to start slow and then see what is feasible for you. Also looking at costs. The wire mesh and hooks and things like that um, enable us to start slow. It was maybe $300, $350 for like two big rolls and the stakes and the zip ties. When you go to herbicide spraying, that can be in thousands of dollars. So you want to be sure that you can secure the funding, get grants, um, that your select board is on board with you doing different work like this throughout the town. But start slow, do some test sites first, and then you can move on from there.
Okay, another one for Bill. How many years has Campton been working on the knotweed?
This will be our third year doing things. So we did our test sites, we did our surveying the first. We never really completed the surveying because it's very time consuming. You generally need two people in a car. And one person sort of stays with the vehicle, the other one sort of jumps out from the car, takes a quick snapshot, some notes, and jumps back into the car. So we probably did about 75% of Campton doing that.
Is it better to spray in August before flowering or in late September after flowering?
I guess I'll add that, Bill mentioned this too, is there's limited windows to do this, and there's probably limited applicators, and so that is tricky. So I think either of those are good times. Probably physiologically after flowering might be the best bang for your buck, but that's a really short window. So before flowering or after are both great times. What you don't want to do is treat early in the year, like June. I don't know if folks remember, we had that late frost a couple of years ago. The knotweed was about 3 feet tall, and we had a late frost, and it was all dead. And it looked like, wow, great, all the knotweed died, right? But then a few weeks later, it was 3 feet tall again and green. So if you treat too early when that plant is only moving energy from the ground up, you may turn that plant brown, but have no effect on the below ground parts. So timing is late in the year, and it's when you can do it, if you're going to do it, to avoid the pollinators as well, right?
Thank you. That was a great bit of clarification. Oh, sorry. Was there anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Are there any native plants that can choke out or compete with knotweed? Somebody heard a mention that stinging nettles might be an option.
Mm.
Hmm.
I'll just say that one of the tools I always, or part of an IPM is just recognizing native plants. And sometimes when you're managing invasives, you want to be able to recognize whether it's, Knotweed is along waterways, so you may have different species of dogwood shrubs or winterberry holly or things like that. So there are a number of native, high bush blueberry plants that can occupy the same site. Will they outcompete it? I don't know, but oftentimes if we don't recognize those plants and we sort of clear the slate down to zero, we usually make it so that maybe knotweed or another invasive plant might really just reoccupy that site. So it is important to think long term about what vegetation you might want in an area that knotweed may be previously occupied, right? So that then there's green, other native, mix of vegetation of species there. But I don't know that there's one that's going to sort of move in and sort of outcompete it. Yeah.
It's a pretty aggressive plant, so in
Yeah.
anything, it's wiping out whatever's around it.
Yeah.
And then generally you probably wouldn't plant anything for several years anyway after you've treated the, the
Yeah, on a roadway, you might just throw conservation mix down on bare ground just to get something green going. But the knotweed's still there. It's not out competing it. It's just, whenever we have bare soil, disturbed soil, we run the risk of some plant's going to grow there. And if there's invasives nearby, they might be the one, they're typically the ones that are going to be adapted to that disturbed site, and do well.
If you cut knotweed down, how long should it be dried before disposing of it? And can cut stems be dried, then disposed of in a double bagged garbage bag?
Sure. I mean, you sort of know when it's dead. It's all dried out, it's brown, and then you can certainly get rid of it.
Yeah, you don't even have to, if it's brown and dry and brittle and you can sort of break it in your hands, you don't have to put it in trash bags and add that layer of, trash to the trash cycle, right? You can just dispose of it. You can burn it. You can bring it to a brush pile, but it has to be dry and brown and brittle. Yeah.
Thank you. How deep do the roots go, and is it possible to dig out small infestations?
I think you could dig out little ones if you see just a little bit getting started from a fragment. Those fragments aren't deeply rooted yet, but I believe, on a good site where it has access to penetrating roots, it could be 15, 20 feet deep. So real challenge.
Yeah, particularly we had an instance where along that town road, the property owner had a vernal pool. So he was spraying the road, but he had to be careful around that vernal pool. And we wound up having to hand pull like the smaller infestation around that vernal pool.
It definitely sounds tricky. We have another one for Bill, which is what budget do towns need to get started with a knotweed control program?
Oh boy. Well, we actually did a presentation to our select board, and our first year we got $3,000 for the project that we wanted to do. As I mentioned, you could, for your small test sites and a very small startup cost for like $350, you could get, mesh and the stakes and the plastic zip ties that you would need. We have one project this year that's $6,000 alone. So in some the retreats are winding up to be about half of what they cost in the previous year. And then we have some smaller parcels that we're doing, that can be like $1,000, $2,000 in those ranges. So it really depends on how aggressive you want to be. We wanted to start slow and we're ramping up in our costs, but remember that you're sort of dragging your retreats with you as you go. So your budget has to expand, correspondingly. A lot of towns are tight on funds, so you don't want to go crazy and ask for like $30,000 or anything like that. Um, so it really depends, and we see it as an evolving thing. It's ramping up each year, and we hope to add to that budget each year, and then hopefully we'll be successful in getting some grant money to help defray that cost.
Did you apply for the cost share for the herbicides? I know that towns can apply with Doug Sagan and the Department of Ag just to cover the cost of the herbicides. I don't know.
Yes, we'll be
Yeah.
applying for the Ellsworth Hill project is actually along a state road, so we'll be applying for the state grant money for that,
Yeah.
and then some of
Nice.
the smaller parcels will do smaller organizations.
And some folks in the forestry world that I work with NRCS and the program called EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. It helps provide cost share assistance for hiring a forester to write a plan for a property. It's competitive, you have to apply for it, but then that plan has practices that are built into it that you want to accomplish. Those could be related to the species or erosion concerns or invasive plants on the landscape, and you can get some cost share assistance to deal with invasive plants on your own forest land as well. Those are for private landowners, not for municipalities mostly.
And it,
Yeah.
and I also mentioned we are not we do approach some of the property owners to try and get some splitting of costs, particularly if it's deep on their property, and we feel it's really an important priority for environmental reasons to get the project done. But we do ask homeowners to see if there's any cost sharing opportunities for us.
Okay. We have enough time for one more short question. Somebody in the chat was asking about herbivores, sorry, and whether there's of any goats or pigs to root out the rhizomes or eat the knotweed.
I'll take that one initially. Yeah, people have said, "Oh, goats love this knotweed stuff," and that's certainly true. However, they tend to meander around, and in their feces, they can certainly spread knotweed to places where you wouldn't necessarily want knotweed to be. So that's the problem with goats.
I think you need to have them on that site constantly, and they're also, if you do have plants like dogwoods or winterberry holly or whatever, they're going to eat those too. So they're, yeah, it's challenging.
Thank you. It's a good place, I think, for us to end. Thank you so much. Janae, do you have anything to add and bring us home?
No, other than that, we just want to thank everyone for coming. I mean, Mike and Bill, thanks for being willing to speak and give your presentations.
Very
If you
welcome.
guys have any other questions for them, just put them in the chat and we will send out an email with the answers for you guys later. That's all.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.